So after some big balance changes, let's take a look at what's popular to put on the tabletop for the World Eaters and what's not. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking World Eaters. And in this video I thought we'd talk through their top 10 units to be included in tournament armies. I'm sure as people were doing with the Custodes one, a lot of people will have already commented, don't you mean they're only 10 units? And admittedly they don't have too many unique ones. In their codex they do have 30 datasheets though, and still 25 if you discount the demons. So certainly not everything gets played, and for this one I'm just as more interested as what seems to be utterly auto-include and what's a bit more of a player-dependent choice. World Eaters have been doing rather well since their balance changes last time around. After their codex came out, they've been a solid sort of upper mid-tier army. In the balance pass they had some buffs and some nerfs, notably Eightbound getting way better, but also some nerfs to their staples such as Spawn, Kharn the Betrayer and Forgefiends. They still seem to be doing fine so far though. Tournament win rates around about 52% or so, though it's kind of early days, and plenty of placings in high events, but maybe more people going say 4-1 versus actually winning events outright so far, at least for the number of people playing them. In any case, I was interested to see how people were responding to the new World Eaters meta, and for this one I decided to take a look at 20 competitive army lists that had all done well, doing well defined as going 4-1 or better in a grand tournament. That should hopefully be at least fairly selective for the armies that have been designed well. Within those 20 lists, let's take a look at which units make the cut and which ones don't get played. And given that we're looking at the armies that are successful, basically this is a look at the Berzerker Warband, so it won't really inform quite so much if you want to play Gortrak Onslaught or Khorne Demonkin or something. Berzerker Warband does just seem to be clearly the strongest at the moment, with an easy damage buff as its special rule and some okay supporting stratagems. All the units will be using the World Eaters faction rule, so the Blessings of Khorne. You can get 3 different flavours of damage buff to amp up their melee power in one way or another, access to fight on death, and then reroll charges or a 6-inch pylon and consolidate if that makes sense. Then for the Berzerker Warband, all the various flavours of Khorne Violence will get +2 strength and +1 attack on a turn in which they charge. It's certainly a massive deal for the Khorne Berzerkers themselves, though it's helpful on everything, and otherwise there's extra AP in melee, advance and charge and a boosted surge move for the Berzerkers, so extra well supported for getting into melee there, sticky objective in death, and the potential to gain some extra blessings or -1 damage in the fight phase. Literally all of the enhancements are used competitively as well, the Berzerker Glaive being the single most common with the +1 attack and +1 damage to make one fighty character hit harder, and beyond that they have a -1 damage, rerolling 2 blessings dice, and rerolling charges or +1 to charge, and literally all of them get used on the appropriate characters. For honourable mentions and notable units that were nowhere near the top 10, none of the lists use either Angron or the Lord of Skulls for the big centrepiece models. Angron did drop in cost a bit in the last balance update, but it didn't really seem on paper that he'd be really quite where he needed to be. Feels like he either needs further points decreases, though it would probably be more popular if they just gave him some rules buffs instead. Nobody used Terminators, which I would have considered a bit overshadowed compared with Eightbound before, and certainly are now that the Eightbound dropped in cost. Most people weren't really using the gun tanks Maulerfiend or Land Raider. And then there were just 5 units outside of the top 10 that did see a few more consistent picks. 2 used Lord Invocators, I guess interesting enough for a big deep striking Berzerker block if you wanted. Most are going for the Juggernaut Lord for that though. 5 people chose to use the Hellbrute. They're definitely an interesting datasheet, maybe not loads of defense, but if they can get in amongst the enemy, fighting multiple times can have them do some absolutely obscene damage if they get in the right situation. That feels a little bit lower than they were before. I don't know if maybe the Eightbound might be stealing their thunder. If you do want some heavy damage dealers that hit tanks hard, the Exalted Eightbound in particular are pretty brutal there. Then the Master of Executions was taken by 7 of the 20 armies, so he's certainly in contention, often using the Berzerker Glaive to make him a slightly more fighty character. He could be one that could go in transports with the Berzerker blocks if you wanted to, but again if you want a leader for the big 20 strong blocks, it's often the Lord on Juggernaut. Then there were 2 more unit selections that were just outside the top 10, but got selected by a few more of those top competitive army lists. The Jakhals are 85 points, and they're basically there to be the Khorne Cultist Infiltrators. For the 85 points you get 8 guys with a very fast movement of 9 inches. Not a whole ton of damage, but the Berzerker Warband can have them at least fairly threatening against lighter infantry, and they get a reactive move which could be okay to keep them safe, though it is an unreliable one at d6 inches. These guys basically pay a premium compared with the rest of the stuff for infiltrate, and often it's a good idea to have a single unit of infiltrators in the army. It means that if you have scout move units, which the World Eaters usually will do, then you can guarantee that there's space for them to move forward into without being blocked off by enemy scouts or infiltrators. Could do some early game objectives, or could do some move blocking or first turn charging of lighter things in the enemy deployment zone. It still seems that 85 points though, even with a couple of extra advantages like a long movement range. The Goremongers are only making the cut as a single unit in a bit less than half of competitive lists. Next up, after the recent points increases to 170, people are a bit more divided as to whether or not the Forgefiend is worth it. There are perhaps unexpected winners in the World Eaters Codex, putting out some surprisingly brutal ectoplasma fire with rapid fire within 18 inches and also re-rolling hits within 18 inches as well. And with strength 10, AP 3 and damage 3 shooting that's got blast, it means they literally have solid damage output against pretty much everything, and there is a bit of an advantage to having at least some shooting in an army list, as there's some things that you just might not be able to reach very easily with melee, or it might be better to shoot down if you have the choice, perhaps fights first or fight on death units. Going up 20 points does seem to have set them back though. Previously they were pretty close to being in auto-include kind of status. Now they're still played in good numbers it would seem, generally still taking the triple ectoplasma cannon, and generally people aren't spamming them quite as much as they were. Occasionally lists were taking a good 3 of them previously. Now it seems that people are going for more sort of 1 or 2 to support the main advance and seen as a bit more of a luxury. Despite being just out of the top 10 units, they're still getting play. Before we jump into the top 10 proper, I'll just give a quick shout out to Titan's Terrain, the video sponsor. They're one option for some easy to store and transport battlefield terrain. They do things quite differently to the majority of terrain sets out there with their system of folding cardboard pop-up terrain. Basically the idea is for their stuff that you have a 3x4 tile grid that makes a 45 by 60 inch board the right size for Warhammer 40k, and then basically each one of those tiles unfolds and up pops a building. So you basically have an entire battlefield that could fold down completely flat and then be set up and ready to go really quite quickly. The main advantage of that is that because it folds flat, it fits in the box the same size as a normal size board game. So if space is limited to store things at home, or if you wanted to transport it round to a friend's house, it's going to take up a fair bit less space than just about any other terrain set out there. The unusual design does come with a few trade-offs, and I'll talk through them at the end of the video for those interested. But if you wanted to take a look over their stuff, it'll be linked down in the video description below. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Back to the World Eaters though, and let's go through the top 10 units proper. First up, and appearing in 12 out of the 20 competitive army lists, we have the World Eaters Daemon Prince on foot. 200 points for a 10 wounds toughness 10 monster with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable. His Lord of Murder rule giving him lone operative protection when he's within 3 inches of some World Eaters infantry. It could be one to trigger with some Jakhals so you're not putting other things out of position. For 200 points, he's just quite a nice mix of discounted stratagems and a bit of solid melee. Each battle round, one World Eater's unit within 12 inches can have a discounted stratagem by 1 command point, some of the only reliable stratagem manipulation the World Eaters get, with his fairly big base and quite a big aura that can cover really quite a large chunk of the board, and if the enemy gets too close he can certainly hit very hard in melee. 9 attacks at strength 10, AP -2 and damage 3 in Berzerker Warband, and he gets devastating wounds on the charge as well from his special rule. He's also quite a popular one for putting some of the enhancements on. Realistically he could bear a fair few of them, though it's by far the most common with the Helm of Brazen Ire. That's the one that gives you a -1 damage. And while that still doesn't make him stand that durable for the 220 points that he becomes, at least after lone operative protection he can be difficult to deal with for any one unit and might well survive at least one turn on the front lines. Overall certainly a strong unit, though not quite strong enough to be in auto-include territory. At over 200 points with an enhancement you are passing up other things. Next up, and only making it into 9th on the list, we have the regular 8-bound. Despite really quite a big points cut and already being a solid enough unit before, it perhaps seems that the outsized buff to the Exalted Eightbound has maybe stolen their thunder just a bit, and as the more anti-infantry specialists out of the two of them, there's a bit more competition between them and Khorne Berzerkers, where it seems to be the recent fashion to run them in big blocks of 20. Even having said that, they're still a very popular unit. 135 points gets you 3 World Eaters possessed equivalents, scouting forward 6 inches to get into a scary position when staging, and then moving 10 inches and hitting hard in melee. Their Eviscerators will be getting 18 attacks at strength 10 and damage 2 on the charge in Berzerker Warband, pretty general purpose there, boosted further by any of the Blessings of Khorne that you might have on the go, and they also have their Beacon of Rage special rule, boosting hits against non-vehicles and monsters in melee, which is pretty excellent for them hitting on a 2+, with a chance to also get a +1 to wound as well. In competitive lists they're typically fielded in squads of 3, with a general purpose profile and plenty of stats buffs that they can get. That seems to be enough for most people's purposes, and usually only appearing in 1 or 2 units per army at 2,000 points. It could also be used to deliver a Slaughterbound to melee as well. He can scout alongside them, and means that the overall unit can be absolutely brutal hitting power for the points cost. Next up, we've got the World Eater's Lord on Juggernaut, and for the most part he seems to be appearing in the Khorne Berzerker list that are taking 20 strong squads. For 90 points you get a 7 wound mounted character, moving 10 inches, and if he attaches to a Berzerker squad they can move 10 inches as well. And Games Workshop fixed the problem of him having to move around terrain when he's attached to an infantry squad by just allowing him to move through terrain features. For his melee, he has low AP but quite a lot of stats damage 2 attacks with strength 6. On the charge and Berzerker Warband, that'll be 12 attacks at strength 8, AP 1 and damage 2, some of which having lance, and while the AP is a downside, that's still going to cause some damage just with the sheer amount of saves that you trigger. He also helps out big units by allowing them to attack within 3 inches, so that could be helpful for getting just a few more Berzerkers into range if it matters, and can be a good option to bear the Battle Lust enhancement. That's the one that can allow you to reroll charges, or potentially +1 to charge if you have that active as a blessing. Occasionally some lists can have him go solo as well, maybe bearing something like Favoured of Khorne and keeping it safe. Overall though, while 10 strong Berzerker squads are good, I guess he will be. He can certainly propel a scary amount of Khornate violence a very long way. Between a 10-inch move and advance and charge stratagem, they should be at least fairly reliably making melee with things around 21 or 22 inches away, never mind re-rolling charges with Battle Lust. Next up, and given the World Eater's smallish roster, we're already getting into things that are pretty well auto-includes, but the single most passed up one out of these seems to be the Slaughterbound, appearing in 16 out of 20 lists, though still obviously the vast majority. He's 85 points for a 8-bound on steroids, possessed by a Bloodthirster rather than Bloodletters. He's basically an 8-bound with twice the wounds, and hits very hard with his Lacerator and Demonic Claw, 6 attacks at strength 10 and damage 2. So going up to 7 and strength 12 on the charge. The boosted strength was quite a nice buff from the last balance pass. Once per game he can get even scarier. Another 3 attacks, so potentially up to 10, and also gaining devastating wounds as well, and he's a particularly strong choice for bearing the Berzerker glaive. So stacking that all up for a big turn of melee violence, that's potentially 11 attacks at strength 12, AP -2 and damage 3 with devastating wounds, all hitting on a 2+, and never mind any buffs from the Blessings of Khorne stratagems or the 8-bound unit rules. He can scout with the regular 8-bounds to potentially have that hitting the enemy front lines, potentially turn 1 if they move up a bit, or deep strike alongside Exalted Eightbound. You could use rapid ingress or just move up the board behind cover. Overall, he's a solidly efficient melee damage dealer at 85 points. If given the Berzerker glaive, he gets to be kind of monumental with that damage 3, and even has the bonus that if the opponent manages to swing and miss against the 8-bound, he might even revive one if they happen to survive. I see that as a bit of a bonus as opposed to anything that he could do reliably though. Talking of 8-bound, the other big winners from the World Eater's balance pass were the Exalted flavour. They're now 140 points for 3 of them, or 280 for 6. Get deep strike rather than scout, so they could rapid ingress if you'd like, and strike with those 8-bound chain fists, 4 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 2, but with anti-monster and anti-vehicle 3+. In the balance pass, as well as really quite a big points decrease, they also had their special rule improved vastly, +1 damage in melee against monster and vehicles, so essentially damage 3 there when they already had quite a good profile before, and that could confer to the Slaughterbound as well, who's already pretty violent enough. Overall, it does seem to have made them into borderline auto-include status for the World Eaters, and while they were the lesser taken option previously, it now looks like they're the favoured one over the regular scouting 8-bound, despite them also getting really quite a nice points cut as well. Again, they're almost always taken in squads of 3, as with that sort of monumental amount of violence, they're probably going to have a good chance to one-shot the things they get into anyway. Going all the way up to 280 points is likely to be vast overkill, though it seems the vast majority of people aren't really spamming them, usually taking just 1 or 2 units per list at 2,000 points, and many of which might be paired with a Slaughterbound. Certainly seems like that's enough to do anti-vehicle duties murderously well for the World Eaters, potentially jumping on their prey with rapid ingress if not screened well. Next up, with 18 selections out of the 20 army list, we have the World Eaters Rhino. They're 85 points, and not quite so much to say about this one. Basically a sturdy metal box to have your angry marines charge into battle out of. For 85 points, 10 wounds at toughness 9 is still really quite solid. They do have a few small arms, and basically it means that they can extend the charge threat range of a Khorne Berzerker unit from within there. They'll jump 3 inches out the front in the turn in which they charge, or if there's nothing within threat range this time around, they can basically move up the board and maybe try and stage in a mid-board ruin, somewhere where they might be safe, or at least have the place where their squad can disembark into and be safe. If they're shot, they could make themselves hard to kill with smoke potentially, and if the enemy moves units up, then you could potentially disembark the Khorne Berzerkers within if it makes sense, which occasionally could do things like swing an objective unexpectedly, or put them in a position where they could do a dangerous blood surge or heroic intervention. Feels like it's not necessarily one that would be quite so easy to plan around, but depending on where the opponent chooses to move and what things they've already moved in the movement phase, you might be able to get Khorne Berzerkers out where they can do something useful and not be threatened. The majority of army lists have been taking 1 or 2 of them, perhaps with Kharn the Betrayer and his unit of 10 of them getting priority. He's a unit that you really want to keep safe and have hitting at maximal efficiency if you can, and extending their threat range a bit to make sure they get into battle even a really long way away can be quite a big deal. Talking of which, despite a bump up to 100 points from 85, Kharn the Betrayer seems to be just as popular as ever. I'm certainly thinking he would still be very, very strong. It doesn't look like he's at all been knocked off his auto-include status. Kharn basically makes the difference between whether or not a Berzerker unit can be a little bit underwhelming against hard targets or genuinely very threatening. In Berzerker Warband, he'll be having 9 attacks on the charge at strength 9 and damage 3. So nice to have some high damage attacks to threaten tough stuff or Terminator equivalents. And then both for himself and his units, you get to reroll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1, barring any other complicating factors like lethal hits. That often translates into a direct 36% damage buff. So pretty brutal stuff between his own profile and how much that helps out the Berzerkers. He gets the chance to pop up on death after he's slain the first time, and with that amount of damage he can do, that's a very big deal indeed. As mentioned, could easily get where he needs to be with his squad in a Rhino, and could be great users of the Berzerker-centric stratagems, advance and charge, and extra AP for all those chain blades, certainly both going to be enjoyed. He also gets his Von Betrayer rule to be able to kill the odd Berzerker, but given how useful he is, I think we can forgive him for that. Finally, there were 3 units that were taken in literally every single one of these competitive lists that did well, so thoroughly auto-include for the World Eaters at the moment. It seems that despite a meaningful percentage points increase up to 90 points, the Chaos Spawn again are just as auto-include as they ever were. You get 2 fast and fairly expendable models for the 90 points. They scout 6 inches up the board and then move 10 inches and can advance and charge, so their threat range is absolutely enormous. With the Blessings buffs, they can pretty reliably deal some damage to some medium infantry, and just otherwise be fairly good trading units that are a bit more expendable than most. I still will require the enemy to actually make some efforts to take them down. They've got 4 wounds with a 4+ save and a 5+ feel no pain. So just one squad small flurry of small arms just isn't going to cut it to destroy them. They could be good users of the sticky objective on death one as well. Potentially expendable enough to move on to objectives and when they're shot down, mark it for the Blood God. Obviously still doesn't look like a +10 points has made any people more tempting to take 8bound for the scout role or Jakhals for the expendable unit role. And pretty much every single army list is taking either 2 or 3 of them, with just fairly huge amounts of utility they can have with that enormous movement, still having okay damage and defense with it, and being more expendable than most things in the army. Next up, we've got the Jakhals. They're no less auto-include, though generally just the 1 unit of them, and they're here due to the sticky objectives, even if they do have some other value. For your 65 points, you get 10 Khorne cultists, toughness 4 with a 6+ save, and a 7-inch move. Even the weakest troops in the army can actually pack at least somewhat of a punch in the Berzerker Warband on the charge. They will get quite a lot of extra attacks, and being at strength 5 or higher, a couple of boosted profiles in the unit don't hurt them as well, with the Mauler Chainblade and Skull Smasher. At 65 points, they tend to be the cheapest unit on its own in the army, so are really quite expendable, though as mentioned they're pretty much auto-includes due to their Objective Ravage special rule. You mark 1 point that they're on, and that remains under your control until the opponent can control it at the end of any phase. So great to have that on the home objective. That means that late game you might be able to push up and abandon it, and still have it under your control. Given there's big diminishing returns on that, they usually tend to just get taken in 1 squad of 10, start on the objective, and then either screen from there or move up if it makes sense to. A few of the lists did take a 2nd unit as well, giving you a slower moving expendable threat like the Spawn, to march up to a mid-board objective and then take that for you. Maybe baiting the opponents to sending something more valuable to destroy them and take the objective so you can hit it back, or hiding out of line of sight in a mid-board ruin perhaps. It's quite nice to do have at least a little bit of melee damage between that and their objective secured rule. They could do some fairly fun charges against lighter enemy deep strikers that might presume to think that the backfield objective isn't guarded by something violent. Finally though, and perhaps rightfully in pride of place at the moment, are the Khorne Berzerkers. It seems like over the last month or two, people have really warmed up to the 20-man squads, and now the average World Eater list is going really quite heavy on Khorne Berzerkers. At least 1 unit appears in literally every single list, and at minimum it's 10 of them paired with Kharn for most, but most people are taking more. On average it seems that there's 30 Khorne Berzerkers total per list, some going all the way up to 50. Overall, it's pretty fun to see the rank and file of the Blood God being a bit more of a central part of the army. I was wondering whether 8bound might be a bit more the mainstay focus of the force, but it doesn't seem so right now at least, and they're still taken in a more supporting role. For the Berzerkers, it's 180 points for 10 of them, 360 for 20, that gets you some 8-inch movement marines with OC2, then attacking with a massive amount of chainblade attacks, the base profile a little bit on the weak side at strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, but with the sheer amount of buffs that you can stack on them it does enough, and there's 1 Khorne Betrayer per 5 of them to hit with some much bigger attacks at strength 8 and damage 2. The Berzerker Warband helps both of those profiles in a big way with extra attacks and +2 strength, getting to some good breakpoints, and as mentioned earlier you've got the options for advance and charge, extra AP and melee, and making their blood surge super reliable. when they're shot potentially jumping into an engagement range with anything within 9 inches, which depending on the opponent could be absolutely game-changing. In their big 20-strong formation, they're often fielded with a Lord on Juggernaut. As mentioned, he'll give them a 10-inch move, which is rather nice, extends their threat range, could bear Battle Lust, and could allow a few more of them to get into the fight with his other special rule. And then there's usually a squad of 10 of them with Kharn the Betrayer jumping out of a Rhino. Very small units, though no less dangerous given the presence of Kharn and his chain axe. Some people are getting some good value out of the Master of Executions as well, maybe tending to be a bit more popular if you haven't given a Slaughterbound the Berzerker glaive. On the board though, those 20 strong units can just be an absolutely terrifying threat, threatening some pretty enormously long charges, and then with the potential to jump into melee if it makes sense to after that when the opponent's trying to frantically deal with them. And if they can catch things, they're pretty well capable of dealing with multiple enemy infantry units and potentially tougher stuff at the same time. Overall seems to be a good day if you've got the Khorne Berzerkers, and perhaps particularly for those who picked up the last combat patrol for them. In any case, let me know your thoughts. Interesting to take a look at what's winning for the World Eaters right now. Let me know how you've been finding these units on the tabletop yourselves, if you've been playing with or against them. That's about it for this one, though before I go, I'll just give a quick shout out to Titan's Terrain once more, for those interested in their pop-up folding cardboard terrain system. As I mentioned in the earlier segment, this one does come with a few more pros and cons than the average terrain set out there. For the biggest advantages, it's really quite easy to store on transports due to folding flat, which I'd say is the main USP. Otherwise, as with most third-party terrain sets, it is far cheaper than a whole board of Games Workshop terrain by a crazy margin, and at least somewhat comparable to cheaper sets of MDF terrain. Another solid draw is that it doesn't need any painting or assembly, it's ready to go immediately, and that can be quite a big factor for people who are very short on time and want to preserve their hobby hours for their armies. For downsides though, the pop-up terrain does come with some drawbacks. It's a bit less sturdy and hard wearing than plastic or MDF given it's made of cardboard and designed to fold flat. You might need to take a bit more care of it, and the buildings don't really bear much weight as well. You might struggle to put units in the top floors of buildings. The grid layout can mean that there's a bit less flexibility than some terrain sets. They can alter it a bit by rotating them. It just might not be the worst idea in the world to put an extra ruin or two on top of it to break up some major firing lanes. It doesn't really make tournament approved layouts if that's what you're going for. Though in general, from people who have actually used it, it seems to do the job well enough as a casual gaming table. For their specific sets, they have two main ones on sale at the moment. They have this Forgotten Furnace one, which is a Chaos Foundry style one. This one with a whole bunch of burnt out factories, glowing ruins and foundries and things. Then a more standard Ruined City Shattered Hive one, with a bunch of ruined buildings and armoured containers and things like that. They each have the option of an expansion centerpiece set as well, basically pushing two towers together to make a big infernal spire or ruin reliquary, if you did want a great big building at the heart of the board. In any case though, check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. If you've been enjoying the videos and like to help keep them coming, channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.